All right. It's Rayos the Hermit broadcasting live from my Hermit Cove on a sunny Wednesday morning. And, first, some news. Zoran Mamdani sweep. Not just a Zoran sweep, but a Democratic sweep across the nation last night. Anyway, I won't harp on that though. As excited as I am, since this is not a political channel. All right, well, instead of moving on to our second item for the day, on the me and a friend review manga chapters of the manga The 100 Girlfriends Who Really, 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 really Love You. And every month we do a little farcical, like, stock report on how the different girlfriends of the month did in terms of their growth, sort of fan reception and whatnot. So that's going to be today at 4 p.m. CST. So if you're interested in that, feel free to stop by. We got 2 people waiting. I guess 3 now that I'm here. But yeah. Buy. No, wait, sell. Oh, wait, you can't see because I'm in the way. Buy. Wait, sell. And you lost your house. Isn't this a great system? Yeah, so yeah. If you're interested in that, that's there. But yeah, without further ado, we should get started with, Celtic and Nordic paganism. What are the differences? Are they the same as, like, this is a video that caught, as I was reading out my introduction bit that I wrote to get, to sort of get myself started when I open a video. But yeah. So we have Celtic and Nordic paganism. What are the differences with Jacob Todson? Now, there's one video that caught my attention a while ago, which is, I guess, why I put it in my watch later list. But yeah, I've mentioned before that I'm a big world building head and fantasy writer. So these kinds of deep dives into the nuances of seemingly similar cultures, always interest me. It's always much easier to understand something by, contrasting it to something else. Also way more efficient since you're basically learning 2 things for the price of 1. So yeah, let's get started. Have my notes app here to jot down any little thoughts. Good on you, man. Oh my god, don't tell me. I just realized the audio output was turned off. We'll go back. I don't feel like going through my spiel again, so we'll just. I think it's a nice thing is I can just, in editing, I can cut that out. Anyway.
Hello, my name is Jacob Todson. I recently sold nearly everything I own to travel Northern Europe in order to understand more about the ancient religions of the past. And today, I'm in Scotland to discuss the differences between Celtic and Nordic paganism. Welcome to Cairn Poplar, a 5,500-year-old pagan site here in southern Scotland. So what makes this site so interesting is that despite it being in Scotland and what would be considered Celtic to many people, this is not Celtic. 5,500 years ago, these people were not Celts. We barely know anything about the people that would have held ceremonies here 5,500 years ago. And that's one of the precursors we have to have before we discuss too much into the difference between Celtic and Nordic, is defining what this actually means. So when we're talking about the Celtic, we're talking about a very large area of central, western, and northern Europe. and a
Let's
very
move that out of the
large
way.
group of people that existed for hundreds of years in various tribes and traditions. And what we actually know as far as written source material is very limited. So when we typically talk about Celtic beliefs today, we are talking about Irish beliefs, because the Irish sagas, the Irish cycles, are where we get most of our written source material. And so most Celtic deities that are known today, at least in prominence, are Irish deities. With that, there is also the Mabinogion in the Welsh belief system, and then there's also the writings of Julius Caesar with the Gauls. And then, of course, we're left with a scattering of information from all around Central Europe when it comes to artifacts and sacred places of the past. But again, these can only give us so much information, because once again, this behind me here is not Celtic. It's a proto-Celtic. It's the people that existed here in Scotland before the Celts came. Now, when it comes to the Nordic, we're left with a very similar issue. So Nordic can be interchanged with Norse quite commonly. I say it myself. But what we're really talking about is Scandinavia. So Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, and then up into Iceland as well.
Pretty much no overlap between the Nords and the Celts. So that makes it easy to at least differentiate them geographically. And we'll see what sort of cultural and I guess societal differentiation we can get later, but yeah.
Then there's also Germanic paganism, which often gets roped in with Nordic paganism because they are very similar. Now, there is a difference between Germanic and Nordic paganism when it comes to traditions and naming, but again, we're left with very little information from the Germanic, and so oftentimes they get combined quite easily. So the main written source material comes from Iceland when it comes to Nordic paganism, with the prose and poetic Eddas, which many of you probably know. But there are other source materials we can kind of look into, including Saxo Grammaticus is the history of the Danes, written in the Christian era, but it goes into a lot of detail about Danish paganism, Danish mythology, and history. And then we also have the writings of Tacitus with Germania, which is one of the only source materials we have when it comes to the Germanic people and what they did as far as religious practices, very similar to what Julius Caesar wrote when it came to the Gauls. And so we have this wide area divided between Celtic and what is Nordic, and then subgroups of that with the Gauls, the Irish, the Welsh, and then you have the Danes, the Swedes, the Nords, and the Icelandic, and then the Germanic.
Okay, so who were these guys in northern England? The Britons, maybe?
And then the individual tribes of all this. So what I'm really trying to tell you here is this is a very complicated subject material. I would guess we only know about 5% of what actually happened in the past, if not less than that. So reconstructing beliefs today is very difficult. So just please keep in mind throughout this conversation that when we're talking about Celtic paganism, we're typically talking about, or at least I am in this video, talking about Irish beliefs that survive today that are typically the prominent figures of Celtic beliefs. And then when we're talking about Nordic paganism, this also talks about Germanic, Nordic, and then it's all coming from Iceland. It's all coming from Icelandic written source materials. And then with both, we have evidence within archaeology, such as these sites. But again, this is not Celtic, so this makes it more difficult. Now, with that, let us talk about the gods of the Nordic pantheon and the Celtic pantheon, and how there may be similarities, but also their differences. So when comparing and contrasting the differences and similarities between the Celtic, Irish, and the Nordic deities, it's kind of interesting because at first you might be inclined to say that some of the deities are very similar. When we look at gods such as the Dagda and Odin, they are very similar. They have similar aspects. They're both wandering, gray-bearded old men who have many children with many different beings and are part of a lot of different stories. They're both associated with magic. The Dagda is associated with druidry, whereas Odin's associated with Seidr and rune work. But they're also both gods of war. But then the actual individual stories of them
also does remind me a little bit of Zeus, which, I mean, I think, what is it called? Like the Indo-European, or no, not Indo-European, actually, let me just look that up. Like the proto-language. Okay, I think it is Indo-European. Yeah, Proto-Indo-European language, also abbreviated as PI, had a lot of like the basics of like world religion, at least old world religion, kind of borrow or just wholesale inherit cultural patterns from that pie culture. One of them is like, the Odin Zeus, I guess Dagda figure, who is like the head of, I guess, the current pantheon of gods, and does a lot of the things that Mr. Jacob Todson was talking about, where having a bunch of kids, being sort of kind of a powerful war god sort of thing.
But they're also both associated with druidry, whereas Odin's associated with Sather and rune work. But they're also both gods of war.
Yeah,
but
God
then
of
the
War.
actual individual stories of them are quite different. And so more than likely, the Dagda and Odin have a similar root in history, possibly a singular god that they are associated with. And
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm talking about.
their own unique stories. Now, where this leaves us as modern pagans is ultimately up to the individual interpretation. Some people may look at the Dagda and Odin and say, oh, they're so very similar, they might be the same deity, and so I'm going to worship them as the same deity. Some people would say that's wrong and you can't do that. Personally, what I believe is that they are two separate deities, because being here once again in Scotland and worshipping the Norse gods, they do feel like two separate things, and so I do feel that the Dagda and Odin are two separate deities personally. And the other reason
it's not unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable take, given, just because, for example, English and Latin are both, they both inherit linguistic traits from the Proto-Indo-European language, does not mean that they are indistinguishable from each other. Like, I think anyone, I thought anyone would mistake one for the other. Like, that they are separate languages, and similar way that religions can evolve like that. Even if this the Dagda and Odin are both inherited structures or whatever from the pie sort of godhead, give enough time, enough cultural evolution, they will become distinct, mutual exclusive pantheons.
These are the two most similar deities from my research. Many of the Celtic deities and the Nordic deities do not line up that well. When we look at the Morrigan and Freya, once again, on paper, they might seem quite similar. The Morrigan is a goddess of war, of death. She is typically considered a very dark deity, a very heavy deity, and then she's also associated with witchcraft. And then on paper over here with Freya, she's a goddess of war, a goddess of death. She looks over some of the dead, associated with birds, very similar to the Morrigan, who's associated with birds as well when it comes to crows and hawks. And then Freya is also associated with Sather magic and witchcraft. But many people who worship Freya today describe her as a very light deity, and then there's also a line within the Eddas that say Freya is a very easy deity to reach, and there's a whole story about someone building a cairn to Freya and reaching out to her. And so even though on paper they may seem very similar, the actual beings of Freya and the Morrigan are very different. Now, one thing I actually found very interesting is that the Celtic belief system does have a smithing god. Gods of smithing are also common within Greek and Roman belief systems, but within Celtic belief systems you have Goyim. But what is unique about the Nordic belief system is they do not have a god of smithing that we know of. The closest would be Voland, who is mentioned in a story, who is a smith, but from what we know, he is just an elf. And then we have the dwarves, who are in charge of the majority of crafting of magical objects throughout Norse mythology. And so we have an entire group of beings associated with smithing, whereas we have a god of smithing within the Celtic belief system. Now, I also think it's very interesting that the Scandinavian peninsula and then the British Isles are very associated with the sea. This is where they get a lot of their food, it's where they trade, it's where they wage war, it's how they get to other places. And so both people groups had very important connections to the ocean without a doubt. And yet we know very little about the Norse gods of the sea. We know about Njord, but we know very little of him besides the fact that he has good-looking feet. And then we have the Jotnar of Aegir and Ron.
Fucking feet fetishes. They've been here since the beginning. Just biding their time until freaking Fansly and OnlyFans models showed up to reintroduce this fucking this malignancy to the modern era.
who are associated with the sea as well, but they're quite negative when I believe most people look at their relationship. But again, we know very little about Aegir and Ron. And then there is some association with Thor and the sea, but very little when it comes to the controlling of storms. But within the Irish belief system, we have Manannán mac Lir, who is a very prominent deity and is associated with the afterlife, but is also a god of the sea. And so it's interesting that I believe that the Nordic belief system probably had some very interesting rituals and spiritual connections to the sea and the oceans, but we don't know that much that survives, whereas we can see within the Celtic belief system that they did have a prominent connection to the sea with Manannán mac Lir. All too often within polytheistic belief systems, we associate deities with singular aspects a little too much. And I think this is sadly a slight problem when it comes to the Roman and Greek understanding of the god of war, the god of love, the god of death. This is actually...
That was... Yeah, I'm taking that was a very specific to them trait that is not necessarily shared among just any random-ass religion. Yeah, makes sense.
Where the Celtic and the Germanic and the Nordic are very similar is that the gods don't typically fall into these categories of the god of love, the god of death. They have many different complex things about them. Let's look at the Celtic goddess Brige, or Brigid, one of the most prominent deities that survive today, and she's associated with new life, with spring, with fire rituals, with healing and magic, and is the primary deity of Ireland as she survives within St. Brigid and still has a holy day, and is the chief goddess of the celebration of Imbolc. And then we have Frigg within the Norse belief system, who is a mother goddess. She is the wife of Odin, but then she has her handmaidens, which have so many different aspects. And then we have the actual story of her sitting on Helansgiof, the throne of Odin, and her and Odin making a bet about two different boys on Midgard, and her winning the bet and being quite cheeky with Odin. And so she's a very complex character, just as Brigid is, or Brige. And so, you know, they're not just goddesses of one thing. The deities don't just have one component within Celtic and Nordic belief systems. But I could sit here all day and compare and contrast the various different deities that exist. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that the Celtic and the Nordic deities really aren't the same. While they may have commonalities between them, and it's up to you to determine how far you take that belief when it comes to deities such as the Dagda and Odin, ultimately they are very different, and they come with very different traditions and stories and values as well. So I hope that all makes sense. This was a very hard section to film because I thought about just giving you a list of the Irish deities, giving you a list of the Nordic deities. I mean, like, these all kind of make sense,
Yeah.
but I don't know how much that actually helps you. So I figured this conversation around the similarities and differences of the two pantheons may be a little bit more helpful. Let's take a wee break in the middle of this video simply to say, if you're enjoying it, please make sure you like and subscribe and all that good YouTuber stuff.
Of course.
But also, if you want to support this channel even further to ensure I can continue to come to places like this, to discuss topics like this with all of you, please think about supporting me on Patreon. Because this video did actually cost quite a money to make, simply for renting the car and doing all of this in one day, all the expenses around that. I've traveled all across this area. So if you do want to support me and the creation of this content, truly I would not be able to do it without the amazing people on Patreon. Otherwise, I have also written a book recently called A Yule Story, and I'm also working on the sequel right now called A Midsummer's Tale. So you can pick up A Yule Story right now on Amazon, and A Midsummer's Tale coming out very soon. Before we leave the Karen Poplar, I do want to talk about holy places as well, because they're actually very similar to both the Celtic and the Nordic. Now again, we have to talk about the complicatedness of the fact that this site is not Celtic, but it was used by the Celtic people, because it's been used from 5,500 years ago. This site has been used for religious purposes, both by people 5,500 years ago, by the Celtic people. People added the burial chamber here later on, and then Christians even added graves here as well. So this site has been seen as sacred. And this is very similar to the Nordic and Germanic as well, as holy places have been transformed from sacred groves and healing wells into sacred sites for Christianity and Catholicism. And so while a lot of the original sacred sites have changed names, typically they have pagan origins, and oftentimes it's just a little harder to find them, such as Arthur's Seat here in Edinburgh. It has Catholic reasons of why it's sacred, but those ultimately come from pagan reasons as well. And I experienced this in Germany as well as Denmark, as they're like, oh, this is Saint so-and-so's place, but more than likely it was a sacred grove to some pagan deity back in the day. So this
Yeah, that is how one of the big ways of Christianity spread in the whole Well, honestly, just in general, they love doing that um, Borg style, assimilating other cultures, religious practices, and figures and deities into their own. Like, I mean, there was a famous example in the Americas with using the Virgin Mary as various mother goddesses sort of things, and via that, Christianity was able to spread pretty effectively throughout a lot of Mesoamerica.
Similarities between Celtic and Germanic and Nordic are definitely within sacred groves, stone circles, and sacred sites, such as the one here at Cairn Poplar. Now, with that, we do have some evidence of an interior temple holy place of Sweden and Uppsala, so there possibly were more structured buildings within the Nordic, but these came quite later from what we know. And while there are some more elaborate buildings within the Celtic world, again, it's hard to say how much it was actually used by the Celtic people, but ultimately it seems that the wooden temple was more of a late addition to the Nordic belief system, whereas here I don't think it ever really picked up. Maybe that's just because the Celtic belief system disappeared earlier than the Nordic. But the thing to take away, sacred groves, stone circles, sacred places, Celtic and Nordic both believed they were powerful and had purposes within their beliefs. All right, now let's talk about death. So death within the Nordic and Celtic are actually very different. Again, within the border regions, you're going to have some similarities, but for the most part, it seems that the Celtic belief system believes in reincarnation. Now, there is an other world that exists, and you can go there after death, but it seems to be this exchange of when something enters the other world, something comes into our world and goes back and forth. And so there's an exchange of energy when it comes to the life and death cycle. And this is not something we necessarily see within the Nordic belief system. Within Norse belief, we have the concepts of the halls of the gods. Now, to what extent this is again up to personal interpretation. And so the primary hall, of course, is Valhalla, which many people know about, the Hall of the Slain. The other one known about is Hell, where the sick and the old go, and Hell and Valhalla are typically where people's knowledge base drops off when it comes to the Norse.
Yep.
And this is because we don't know that much about the other halls, but every single god in Asgard, or at least the prominent deities, have a hall. And so a common belief, and it's shared by myself as well, is that you can go to these other halls as well upon your death. This is kind of where the information stops, and so you have more of a, different afterlife when it comes to the Norse belief system of you're going somewhere in the spirit world, and then you have the going into the other world and then possibly exchanging within the Celtic as well. And we do have artifacts to help back this up within the cauldron found in Denmark, which was Celtic or Gallic. There is an image of basically reincarnation occurring with men marching one way and then falling and then coming back into new life. And this is again a theme that we see throughout the Celtic world. We may actually find a little bit more commonalities within burial practices because burial mounds are prominent throughout the Celtic world or pre-Celtic world, but also within the Nordic world. I've seen burial mounds all over the world, and so burial mounds are a common belief. And there are mounds here from the Celtic era that contain grave goods and offerings showing that there is a journey into the next life, just as burial mounds in the Scandinavian countries that contain these pots of liquids of food going into that next life as well. Again, I'm going to argue that the Nordic is different because they also have the boats. Boat graves are very prominent across Scandinavia. The ones I think of often are the ones in Gotland, which are basically rocks shaped in the form of a boat, and people were both cremated and buried in them. And so the motif of a boat being a part of the next life seems to be a commonality. Where as far as I know, there are no Celtic graves found with these boats in them. So there is a distinction there between the two burial practices of the Celtic and the Nordic. But ultimately, our information is very limited on the afterlives, and this is going to be a debate of humanity going forward into our history, and the only people that know what happened when we die are the ones who do die. And so whether or not it's reincarnation with the Celtic, or if it's going into the individual halls of the gods with the Nordic belief system, or if it really is just Valhalla and Hell, we're really not going to know until that fated day comes.
True.
Before I leave, you can see the ring around here. That's all of the original pillars of the original hinge, all the circles here. And then, of course, I'm standing on the burial chamber that apparently contained 3 different graves, and then the Christian graves are over there. So yeah, 5,500 years of history. They very much believe this was a very sacred gathering spot, they specifically said, for rituals of the past. Absolutely love that. And I realize I've been saying Karen Poplar this whole time. It's not Lur, it's Karen Popple, so I apologize for that. But such a beautiful place to experience Scotland and the spirits that exist here still to this day. All right, now on to our next location. Well, I didn't make it very far down the road before I found something truly unique that I think you'll like a lot, and it'll be a great spot to talk about modern paganism within the Celtic and the Nordic. So let's hop out of the car and show you what just happened to be on the side of the road. Seriously, can you believe this right here? It's just a stone circle on the side of the road.
Right.
Now, I will say, I'm pretty sure
This is a random patch of 1,000-year-old history.
it's a modern recreation.
Okay, never mind.
Signage or anything like that. And
Spoke too
there
soon.
is a modern grave here in the dead center. I mean, whoever was here was definitely a pagan enthusiast, or probably a pagan, as there is an altar stone right here. Someone buried in the center of a stone circle that's been made. This definitely has an interesting presence to it, and I want to take you to this little hut I see in the distance, which I'm very curious about.
Yeah, man is playing with fires. This feels like the beginning of a pagan religion styled horror, like a freaking Silent Hill, but for pagan iconography or whatever. But given that he finished the video, I think it's probably safe, unless he just edited out those parts.
I don't know what in the world's going on here, but I think we can confirm pagan activity for sure, because you literally have like an altar plate in here, and I looked it up. This place is called Persephone's Temple. Like, it's this spot right here. Once again, stone circle right over there with a hill in the background. And then this. Now this is very interesting. And so this is, I think, a good spot to talk about Celtic paganism as it survives today, and really Norse as well, and European in general. It's a lot more subtle. It's not going to be something that's big and aggressive. It's going to be subtle things like this on the side of the road. I don't know who built this. I assume it's the farmer over there. I don't know if they did it for a pagan purpose necessarily, but the roots of what this is pagan, regardless of that. So it's just steeped in tradition and in history of the land here, and that's true in my time in Denmark and Germany as well, of a lot of people who practice traditions that I would argue are pagan traditions, that just do them a part of their everyday life. And I find that in Europe, Celtic and Nordic and Germanic paganism are more just part of everyday life for the people who practice it, whereas in the States, where these revivals are happening, it's a little bit more aggressive, it's a little bit more different, and I'm starting to recognize that. I think
that makes sense. That's how those things tend to go when there's a word for it, actually. I think, let's see if I can find it. Also, I don't know how I would look for it, but it's this thing that will happen where religious converts, or say you have a home place where the religion was started and developed, and then people sort of migrate to some new location or nation, whatever. The migrants are almost always going to be way more religiously extreme than their native counterparts. I mean, you need to look no further than what happened when European Christians came over to America, and they tend to be way more extreme about it than Like the American Christians tend to be way more extreme about it than their European counterparts, who were usually a lot more chill in comparison, a lot more, as you said, kind of this everydayness to it.
The biggest takeaway I've had from experiencing both modern Nordic paganism and modern Celtic paganism is everything comes down to mutual respect, because everyone's practice is going to be different because of how scattered our information is from the past. And so everyone's going to practice a little differently. And so no matter what, as long as there's mutual respect among practitioners of Celtic or Nordic, I think that is what is most important. And understanding that in North America it is different than it is here in Europe. I like how it is here in Europe. It's more subtle at times. It's more in things like this than necessarily, big explosive things. Whereas in the States, we're still trying to figure things out, I would argue, because everyone in the States has such a muddled ancestry. We're all 10% of something, and, we're all just trying to figure out our roots and try to figure out ancient traditions. And I think we're still figuring that. We're in our baby steps. We're having to learn again in a different land after hundreds of years of not doing it. Whereas people here, most people that still do it have been doing it for hundreds of years. So yeah, it's in a very strange spot. But ultimately, as I like to say, is that I think paganism ultimately is quite simple. It's about connecting with nature. It's about connecting with the deities that you follow and venerate. It's about celebrating the holidays. And those are going to be different for Celtic and Nordic, and so that might change depending on what you believe in. But ultimately, it's about the simplicity of life. It's about connecting to the nature. These were agricultural-based religions, and so returning to that, I think, is what a lot of people seek. And so whether or not that is Celtic or Nordic to you, I think you'll be quite happy in the simplicity in life you'll find honoring the old ways, no matter where you find them. Welcome to the Livingston Stones here west of Edinburgh and Livingston. What I want to talk about in this spot is the pagan practices of the past according to the Celtic and the Nordic and what we know. So, like much of the information here, it's very scattered of what we actually know about historical practices, and the reconstructed forms of these practices today are very similar when it comes to the Nordic and the Celtic, but there's going to be some nuances. The main difference that we know historically between the Celtic and the Nordic are the Druids. So Druids, if you don't know, are essentially the priest class, the leadership class of the Celtic world, and at one point they had a network spanning the entire Celtic region, and the problem with the Druids is they didn't write anything down. They did everything orally, but they were the spiritual leaders of society, and even the political leaders, military leaders, and that's one of the reasons why the Romans sought to destroy them, and that is often considered the end of the Celtic pagan era, I think, is when the Romans destroyed the final Druids and killed them all off. Because they were the ones that held the knowledge of the ancient Celts. Now, when we actually talk about the Nordic, we don't know that much about their religious leaders. We do know that the Germanic people really saw spiritual power within women, and that women could connect to spirituality, but also to the gods, and could even divine prophecy of the future. And this is confirmed by the fact that we have the Norns weaving fate, carving fate, that we have vulva is one of the only surviving ideas we have of these ancient traditions, ancient leaders, and so vulva and Sather magic is something that is still practiced somewhat today, but just like the Druids, we really don't know that much information. Now,
When he says vulva magic, is it? For those who don't know what the vulva is, it's just like, the external female genitalia. So, I wouldn't be surprised if, an ancient pagan religion had more permissive ideas about that sort of thing. I'm just interested in knowing more about it. I guess I will add that to things to look into. What did he call it?
That is still these ancient traditions, ancient leaders, and so vulva and Sather magic is something that is still practiced somewhat today, but just like the Druids, we really don't know that much information. Now, when it comes down to the actual rituals themselves, this is where we really don't know that much. We do know that the Celts and the Nordic people both divine things from nature. We know the Druids would go to oak trees, and look for signs from the gods. They'll look from signs in nature with birds flying by or the weather changing. And we see the same thing with the Germanic people and even into the Slavic people. Weather changing, animals coming during offerings or coming during rituals were seen as a good sign. And a lot of pagan tribes across Europe, even outside of the Celtic and the Nordic, they were very superstitious. If something was an ill omen, they would be like, nope, we're not doing this. So they really listened to omens, they really listened to signs from nature. So that's definitely a commonality that we see. When it comes to the actual rituals themselves, this is where we really don't know that much. This is where a lot of modern interpretations and modern ideas come in, because we know the basics of ritual, we just don't know the details of ritual. We know there was some form of offering, there was possibly some form of incantation as far as calling out to the deities, and then we know there was some, meaning and purpose behind the ceremony itself, an exchange of gifts between yourself and the divine or whatever you're reaching out to, even if that's the spirits of the woods, giving gifts to the spirits, giving gifts to the house spirits, the elves. These are all traditions we see across Central and Northern Europe, including the Nordic and the Germanic and the Celtic. This is one of the reasons I focus so much on things such as house spirits, because this is a commonality we see amongst everything in Northern Europe, is giving offerings to house spirits, of acknowledging house spirits. And so we may not know the full details of honoring the gods within the Celtic or Nordic world, but this exchanging of gifts seems to be very universal among the two. Now, another key difference when it comes to the actual veneration of deities or the celebration of a religion is the holidays that they celebrate. And we do know, I would argue, probably more about the ancient Celtic celebrations than we know about the Nordic and Germanic, only because with the Nordic and Germanic, we really only know about the Yule celebrations and the Midsummer celebrations. Everything else is modern interpretation and historical speculation. So we have a lot of references to Yule. We have some ideas of what Yule celebration and Yule feast was like. We know about the swearing of oaths on hams. And then modern Midsummer, as it exists today in Sweden, it's the most popular holiday in Sweden still to this day. And a lot of the traditions that are done during Swedish Midsummer now are the same traditions that were done in the past. But as far as the spring and fall celebrations, again, this is where it gets a little loosey-goosey because we have less information about it. We do infer that they had spring celebrations and autumn celebrations, but typically we just don't know the details. Even the spring goddess of Germany, Ostara, we know almost nothing about besides her name. So we can say, oh, Ostara is the goddess of spring, but as far as the celebrations around spring, we really don't know that much. Now, as far as the Celtic, we know about the fire festivals. We know about Imbolc, we know about Beltane, we know about Lunasa, and we know about Samhain. Some of the details are a little foggy on these, but for the most part, we know a lot of details about them as they were celebrated for hundreds of years after the pagan era ended. Beltane probably being the most known because Beltane continued to be celebrated until really the 1950s in popularity. It took a break and now it's even coming back. So the Beltane traditions of having two bonfires, you would lead the cattle around to have the smoke and the sacredness, and then you would have dancing. There's things about, healing and making prayers and wishes at healing well for the next year. So there's a really rich history around Beltane still to this day. And again, that's just not something we necessarily get the details of a lot of the celebrations within the Nordic. Now, the actual dates of these may be a little bit different than you expected because a lot of people know the holidays by the Wiccan Wheel of the Year. Now, while some of these are correct, they're not exactly the same. And this is a subject I've been kind of talking about for a long time. Just know that the Wiccan Wheel of the Year is used by a lot of people. Wicca is very popular. However, as far as historical reconstruction, it's not quite right, specifically with the Yule celebration, because Yule technically historically was based on the lunar calendar, and so it wouldn't be on the solstice, it would be on the full moon after the solstice, or the final full moon of the year, and so it's not going to quite fall on the solstices and equinoxes. Having said that, many modern pagans choose to celebrate on the solstices and equinoxes because the ancient pagans did this as well. And so, again, maybe not be a Celtic site. Stonehenge is not a Celtic site, but oftentimes they align with the solstices and equinoxes. And so we're kind of skipping over a little bit, but we're saying, hey,
Right.
ancient people recognize the solstices and equinoxes. So a lot
We're
of
going
people,
back to basics, ignoring the sequels. They weren't as good as the original.
modern pagans today, Celtic and Nordic alike, choose to celebrate the holidays on the solstices and equinoxes. So I just threw a lot of information at you. Again, Simplicity is key in my opinion. Really, we look at the commonalities here, and there are commonalities of religious practice, at least what survives from the ancient past. Get together around a seasonal change, celebrate the gods of that season, give them gifts, make prayers and offerings for the coming year, make dedications to the next year, for the next cycle, and celebrate. You know, with winter, it's going to be more about coming in. Spring, it's going to be more about coming out. Summer, it's going to be more about celebrating the work you've done, taking a break from working in the fields or in the office, and then fall is going to be celebrating the hard work and the festivities and all this stuff, but also the veneration of the dead. Hopefully you've been able to tell. I can't give you everything about Celtic and Nordic paganism in this video, but I hope that I've been able to bring together at least an idea of their similarities and differences. And again, I would argue that the deities are quite different, a lot of the traditions are quite different, but there's some things at the core of what paganism is that really bring them together. Thousands of years ago, the Celtic people held celebrations for the ancient deities, including the Dagda and the Morrigan, celebrating with fires and festivities, all led by the Druids, which kept sacred knowledge for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And at the same time, from the Nordic and the Germanic world, we have stories of Odin and Thor fighting giants and trying to stop Ragnarok. We have stories of ancient goddesses like Freya or Frigg that possessed witchcraft and sorcery that they taught to the gods. And then, of course, the legends of the Vikings and the raids and how far they explored and the mystery around the gods they followed. Both of these belief systems are unique, fractured, and absolutely beautiful. And while they may be separate, I do truly believe that you can have experiences with both the Nordic and the Celtic deities, as I am here now in Scotland, worshiping the Norse gods, but still feeling something from the land here, the magic and the celebrations that are still held today here in Scotland.
All right. He said he was putting out a lot of information, but I felt like I was picking up a lot of what he was putting down. I mean, I realized I didn't give too much commentary on the video while it was happening, so I mean, maybe he wasn't wrong about being maybe too much information. But I did get some interesting stuff to research from this, notably the vulva sather thing. Yeah. For those who don't know, I'm an adult artist, as in I'm focused on making primarily adult art. So I do like to learn about living and growing up in a culture that is incredibly sex negative. I do like to learn from past cultures that have more permissive attitudes about this sort of thing. Allows me to consider different ways of approaching sexuality that aren't so locked into the mainstream sort of Western Christian, just fundamentally sex negative culture that we're all a part of. But yeah, good video. I guess if I want to learn anything more about sort of a pagan style religious sort of stuff, I know where to go. And hopefully you guys are also interested in the same way. But yeah, that was Celtic and Nordic Paganism by Jacob Totson. Nuts. Yeah, so that reaction was not as long as it could have been. Thinking about Monday's reaction, I only got to like 2 videos. I'm probably not gonna be able to get started on the neurotypical one. Yeah, what happened? We'll probably just go through with what happened to pre-contact dogs, and then be on our way. But yeah, because I guess I could take the time to write, because I do this thing where I sort of write up a little blurb on the video that I'm watching, so I can sort of get myself started when once it gets cut down to a specific video for the I guess YouTube watchers. So I forgot to write one for the next video. So maybe I'll take a second to write up something, or I could just try and improv it, but I don't really know too much about pre-contact dogs. I'll give myself a minute to see if anything comes to mind. Okay. Managed to write up a decent amount. Didn't really focus on spelling, just since obviously I know what it's supposed to be. But yeah, let's move on to our next video. Whenever it loads. All right, so we are checking out Sheree the Explainer's What Happened to the Pre-Contact Dogs. That is to say, the dogs that lived in the Americas and with the Native Americans before those dastardly Europeans came in and mucked everything up with their diseases and their religion and their colonialism. Anyway, I'm very interested in seeing how dogs live in this time. I know that before contact, there weren't really any horses in the Americas, since those were another, I guess, export of the old world. So maybe dogs filled some of those roles. I mean, not riding, presumably, but like pack mules in the sort. I mean, I think I've heard of such a breed, but yeah. Without further ado, we will start with a cute little Chihuahua.
The Chihuahua is perhaps one of the most recognizable of the hundreds of dog breeds out there. They are scrappy little things, and according to most, the smallest breed of dog in the world. How these things descended from undomesticated wolves stands as an amazing testament to
Bro, look at what they did to them. What we did to them.
Crazy biology and evolution can get, even in just a short amount of time, when directed by humankind. But that is perhaps a story best for another day. Breeders claim the Chihuahua can claim direct descent from dogs kept as pets by the ancient Toltecs, and maybe cultures more ancient than even them. As Columbus and the other European explorers that followed him
I didn't say it, but I did. When you obviously when you brought up Chihuahuas, I was like, they weren't they pre-contact dogs? Actually, a pre-contact dog breed. They're not a new invention,
Americas
actually.
and its native inhabitants differed from Africa, Asia, and Europe in the sense they lack many of the domesticated animals familiar to them. Horses, pigs, chickens, cattle, goats, and even hounds familiar to them. Horses, pigs, chickens.
Some recent genetic evidence suggests chickens might have existed in South America prior to European contact. Wouldn't be surprised. I mean, birds. I mean, no, I'm not saying the birds, because birds can like fly and stuff. I'm not saying the birds, the chickens in pre-contact America were necessarily from, because I know they originate from like Asia, I believe. So I mean, presumably they would have hopped over long before. They'd be like convergently evolved domestic species.
Cattle, goats, and even house cats were, prior to 1492, completely alien to the Native Americans.
They really lived in a world without cats. Maybe the colonialism was worth it to bring cats to
the colonizers from the east bringing these animals with them. The one thing the natives shared with the European conquerors, however, were dogs. But the story of these animals and what happened to them is something scientists and historians are still struggling to grasp and understand. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to another installment of Trey the Explainer. The triumph of the dogs. Canines, or as I like to call it, a dog, have shared a long history with us strange bipedal monkeys for tens of thousands of years, to the point the bonds we humans have formed with cats and horses would look like meager footnotes by comparison.
Right.
All the dogs of today were domesticated from wild Eurasian wolves. The exact timing and location of dog domestication is largely a mystery. It might not have been a single event in a single location, but several. Though it most likely occurred in Western, Central, or East Asia.
Bro, that's a big range.
15,000 to 30,000 years ago. Wherever it occurred, it did so in the Old World, when humans were beginning to migrate to other parts of the globe, the humans taking their domesticated buddies with them as they did so. They notably bred them into different populations, favoring certain traits over others to best suit the jobs given to them by the region. A longer snout, a flatter face, poofy fur, a desire to bring things back to their owners. Over the ensuing thousands of years, dogs have been incorporated into almost every human society all around the world, in a myriad of diverse and unique forms, from hunter-gatherers to state-level societies. From the Egyptians in their extinct Tessum, to Polynesians in their Kori, which were brought on voyages across the Pacific Ocean, to
Actually, I didn't know about this extinct Egyptian breed, and add that to the notes. I have a project set in a vaguely, or rather not set in a vaguely Egyptian setting, more like there's a region in that setting that is vaguely Egyptian, and I'd be interested in using some of these Tessum, I guess, designs. Yeah.
Polynesians in their Kori, which were brought on voyages across the Pacific Ocean, to medieval Europeans with their game dogs, hounds, and retrievers, and the Americas were, and still are, no different.
Look at this little guy.
The breeds of America. European colonists, bringing their own dogs from the Old World, noted that the countless indigenous societies and cultures of the Americas already had their own furry, not that kind of furry,
right.
pets as well, prior to their arrival.
Why are you looking like that? Why is he all sad like that?
Kind of furry pets as well.
This poor thing. I mean, this guy looks like he's head empty over here, but you got the ears down, looking down. What happened?
Well, prior to their arrival. In many ways, the use of dogs in the Americas before contact very much paralleled their usage in the Old World. Descriptions made by these explorers tell us that the Native Americans created many distinct breeds from these animals to best suit their needs. On the Great Plains, village dogs were known to participate in hunts for small animals like rabbits. In the north, the Talton bear dog was used by some cultures to hunt animals many times larger than themselves. It is said that though this breed could be gentle and kind to smaller animals and humans, it had enough courage to face a fully grown grizzly, recalling the tales of the Rhodesian Ridgeback breed of the Old World's ability to keep lions at bay. The small dogs would be carried in pouches by humans during hunts, only to spring out and attack when the prey was spotted. The Chiribaya, or the Peruvian shepherd dog, was used by the pre-contact Chiribaya culture of Peru for the purpose of a herding dog, a New World analogy for the border collie breed. Only in
Lots of
America,
convergent
they guarded
evolution
llamas
here.
and alpacas instead of sheep and goats. The Innu of eastern Canada used the Innu canoe hunting dog, a small breed that would sit in the belly of the canoe and jump into the water to catch shot fowl, only to return to the vessel with the bird in their jaws, much like a golden retriever. Other uses for dogs by First Peoples baffled and shocked European societies during the era of colonization. Dogs throughout the Americas were often used as pack animals, notably as sled dogs, most
I was
likely
right.
substituting a role held by horses and cattle in the Old World. The Greenland dogs, Malamutes, and Huskies, strong and reliable, and used primarily in the icy north amongst the Inuit peoples. One observer, when noting the dogs of the Dakota people, said, "The number and utility of these faithful dogs is sometimes astonishing, as they count hundreds, each bearing a portion of the general household goods." Dogs were also used for various religious ceremonies and medical purposes throughout the New World. Chihuahuas, in addition to a use I will address in a second, appear to have functioned as hot water bottles, relieving and dispersing pain to injured areas, with their application to a painful or ill region believed to heal that region amongst the Aztecs.
That's crazy.
The
They're-
Salish Wool Dog of northern British Columbia were
It's kind of better than their current status. I mean, they actually had a real use, but as a hot water bottle, good lord.
prized by the Coast Salish peoples. Great lengths were taken by these societies to keep populations of this breed as pure as possible, sometimes keeping them on isolated islands or in fenced-in caves to separate them from other breeds, feeding them raw and cooked salmon as well. Seems a lot of special treatment for a dog as small as a Pomeranian. Well, as it turns out, because the Salish peoples had no domesticated sheep to use and wild goats were far too difficult to catch, wool dogs were often used for just that, for their wool. Every year in May or June, the little dogs would
Honestly,
be
a lot of this is starting to remind me a little bit of Man After Man, but or rather not Man After Man, more like All Tomorrows, but for dogs instead of humans. I mean, when all you have is a dog, you gotta get creative.
and their fur used to construct greatly sought-after ceremonial blankets. So good were these dog hair blankets that some say they could be as valuable as a human slave.
Oh,
One use
okay.
of dogs by some Native American societies that
Interesting.
revolted European onlookers
Unit of
was that
exchange.
dog meat and food. The consumption of dog meat in cultures throughout the world and throughout time has varied greatly. Just like with many foods, norms associated with what foods one can and cannot eat is largely culturally determined. Just look at cattle meat in today's
Yep.
societies. European society generally found the consumption of dog meat to be considered a major taboo, even during times of famine. For example, William Clark on the expedition, unlike Lewis and the rest, refused to eat a dog even during a period of starvation due to cultural reasons. Some cultures in the Americas held very similar views. The Comanche, for example, saw dog meat as a forbidden food and its consumption as taboo. Other cultures saw dog meat as a delicacy only to be eaten at certain times of cultural significance, and others still consumed them on a more regular and routine basis, with varying degrees of all in between. Hernan Cortez, if he can be trusted, wrote that the little
Yeah,
dogs,
I wouldn't
most
trust
likely
him,
those
but-
tiny adorable chihuahuas, were raised by the Aztecs alongside rabbits and deer for eating, suggesting those little buggers were originally used for a very different purpose, just like guinea pigs once were.
Oh, I didn't know that about
Jokes
guinea pigs.
aside, it is look
Oh,
at
yeah, I
things
mean-
through the lens of cultural.
I mean, if us Westerners, us Westoids are gonna be trying to judge other cultures for eating dogs, well then every Hindu on the planet is gonna be side-eyeing us for our fucking genocide on the bovine races that we're doing on a regular basis. Like, I mean, Unless you just want to go full Western chauvinist, you gotta accept that different people do different things, and it's kind of like just like it kind of just is what it is.
Relativism, where societies make sense within their own cultural context, and there is not a right way to do things culturally speaking. We only find the consumption of dogs and guinea pigs gross because we are part of a society that considers that taboo. Our minds are indoctrinated to think that this is the correct way to view the world. An Aztec might note the same thing about us when looking at some of the weird stuff we eat. An interesting example of this can
Canned
be seen
coral.
in the account of Fanny Kelly, who was held captive and lived amongst the Sioux of the Great Plains. If her account can be trusted, she found her captives' treatment of their companions paradoxical. How could they love and value their companions so much, yet eat them at the same time?
I mean, again, the Hindu could say the same thing about a farmer raising their cattle. And like how can they bear to raise them and take care of them, feed them, house them, only to at the end of their life you can just like use like a fucking cow prod to like basically execute them and then dissect them and chain them up on hooks. And I mean, unless you're a vegan who like is just against all manner of animal butchery and consumption, then you're being not, I guess, not hypocritical necessarily, but you're treating your own, well, like I said, you're letting your indoctrination run the show instead of your mind.
Perhaps an outsider to a society can never truly understand. North America even had, scratch that, has its own dingoes, wild dogs without owners for centuries that roam mostly the isolated forests and swamps along the Georgia-South Carolina border. The Carolina dogs, or the American dingoes, are a shy and reclusive breed that prefers to keep to the wilds, as they have done for many years. And there were other kinds still, and likely ones never properly recorded by European observers. All these being dotted across the tundras, plains, mountains, and valleys, jungles, and deserts of pre-contact Americas. These dog breeds are known to science collectively as pre-contact dogs, or PCDs, and as we will discuss later, are set apart from all other surviving dogs out there, particularly those of the Old World. But as you may have noticed, most of these breeds are no longer around today.
And they got a really good, a really cooperative subject for the photo here. I mean, this dog is staring straight at the camera. Very striking. I mean, I forgot the name of this dog breed, but the very striking facial markings. I wonder if they had any significance in the Native American cultures that bred them. So I mean, that kind of marking thing is very easy. Question mark. Relatively, I don't know. I mean, you can breed it in and out if you want to. So I wonder if they chose to have them look this way for some sort of significant reason, or if they just like, wow, well, that's how they look, and we make no bones about it.
But as you may have noticed, most of these breeds are no longer around today. What happened to them? And where did they come from exactly? Dog Eat Dog World. With their horses and their guns, the Europeans brought with them germs, and we know that the human inhabitants of the Americas suffered greatly for it. Before Columbus, the two continents were filled to bursting with probably somewhere between 10 to 100 million people. The exact calculations are unclear. Within a few centuries after contact, that number was in the hundreds of thousands. So potent was the power of diseases completely unknown to the New World and its people. There is a lesser-known side to this story, with a lesser-known victim, however. The humans brought human diseases, and so did the animals bring animal diseases. The European dogs carried with them old world bacteria and viruses that ran rampant and likely decimated the populations of pre-contact dogs. The simple explanation is that by the time colonists arrived and took the time to observe these Indian dogs, they had largely been driven to extinction and subsequently replaced by the new European dogs that had been imported, with some intermixing of the two populations occurring as well. A situation that is startlingly similar to what happened to the humans of the New World. their owners. The specifics of this period are poorly understood, even to this day, but one thing is clear: pre-contact dogs vanished almost completely, on a scale even worse than their human owners experienced, with apparently only a few holdouts that built up an immunity to these diseases and endured. This eradication of pre-contact dogs might have been more than just disease-driven, with some historians suggesting European attitudes might have driven the favoring of old world lineages over new ones, as well as the quote-unquote persecution of said lineages. In any case, it appears that these rare few survivors include Alaskan Malamutes, Inuit sled dogs, Greenland dogs, Chihuahuas, the hairless dogs of Central and South America, and lastly those feral Carolina dogs, though recent evidence might contest this. Despite these select few, all the other dog breeds of the New World, the wool dogs and bear dogs and canoe hunting dogs, became extinct and no longer exist for us to admire. And what a shame that is. Nowadays, all but a tiny fraction of the dogs you see walking down the streets in American cities, or neighborhoods, or parks, are descended from these legendary pre-contact dogs. The vast majority will descend from old world breeds in stock, primarily European, an entire race of creatures disappearing from the earth. Crazy to think that what happened to humans on a macro scale was essentially exactly what happened to man's best friend. Origins. Where did these dogs come from? The origins of these vanished pre-contact dogs were the subject of debate for centuries. Many of these Native American dogs before their full disappearance was noted
Why is bro side-eyeing me like that?
by early European recorders as distinct from the dogs brought over from Europe, Africa, and Asia. Native American dogs on the Great Plains were said to resemble and sound like American wolves. The canines of the Arikara people, for instance, were described by ones as nothing more than the domesticated wolf. I have often mistaken wolves for Indian dogs. Another noted their voice is not a proper barking, but a howl. Some believe the dogs were partly descended from wolves that have mixed with the dogs. And for a while, scientists thought similar. Where exactly do these animals come from and how did they end up in the Americas? Well, up until recently, two theories were put forth for their origins. It was often speculated that the dogs of the Americas were descended from American wolves, which were then domesticated by the indigenous humans independently from those of Eurasia. And rather than descending from the Eurasian wolves of the Old World, they descended from American wolves. Others held to the theory that these pre-contact dogs were in fact closest related to Eurasian dogs, and were only brought to the Americas alongside with the Native Americans when they entered the continent sometime around 30,000 to 15,000 years ago, across the Bering Land Bridge from Asia.
I'm sure, as is often, though not always, the case with these sorts of competing, options, it's probably a mix of both. I mean, I can imagine it would not be difficult. It would make a lot of sense to bring along your dogs along with the sort of difficult journey. 'Cause, I mean, it's not like these people who migrated across the Bering Strait, where they weren't like, in most cases, they weren't like purposely migrating to like new pastures or something. Like they were just sort of living in one spot and just sort of gradually over generations moving, spreading in a specific direction that just happened to end up with them sort of, I guess, colonizing Americans. So in that context, why would you not continue living along with your dogs, which are incredibly useful and necessary for survival? But it also makes sense that American wolves would also get domesticated in a similar way to the European ones.
It was only with DNA testing
Eurasian ones, I
centuries
guess.
later that the true origins of these doggos was determined. Surprisingly, much of this testing was only conducted a few years ago. One of the most intriguing studies to date only being published last year. During such studies, DNA was extracted from mummies, skeletons, and other remains across the Americas belonging to pre-contact dogs before they declined in populations or became extinct, which were then compared with that of living dogs in homes, villages, feral populations, and so on. Wolves, both Eurasian and American coyotes. Several fascinating things, some of which greatly unexpected, were discovered through such testings. First of which was that the latter theory of pre-contact dog origins was correct. pre-contact dogs were in fact closer related to Eurasian dogs than they were to American wolves. The
Mhm.
dogs of pre-Columbian America are in fact dogs from the Old World brought to the New, albeit through a different route than those the Europeans brought over. However, from there, things get slightly more complicated. The genetic evidence showed that not all pre-contact dogs were the same. There were notable distinctions between the Arctic dogs of the north of America, notably Greenland dogs, Alaskan Huskies, and those of more southern regions. Geneticists determined that domesticated dogs entered the Americas through a series of at least 4 independent migrations that created these genetic distinctions in New World dog populations. The first migration they noted was the one that brought over what can truly be called the original, quote-unquote, pre-contact dogs. These dogs were closest related to the prehistoric remains of the 9,000-year-old dogs unearthed on the Siberian island of Zhukov in northeastern Asia. This seems to suggest that much like their human owners, pre-contact dogs originated from populations from Asia, the canines themselves likely originating from somewhere in Northeast Asia. These dogs appear to have been brought into the Americas after humans had already settled on the continent, splitting from their Asian cousins sometime between 17,500,000 and 13,000 years ago, and remaining in relative isolation. This population appears to be the ancestors of everything from the wool dogs of British Columbia to the wolf-like dogs of the Great Plains to the Chihuahuas of the Aztecs.
Okay, never mind. I guess it was just the migration option.
A second independent migration occurred around 1000 CE when the Thule culture reintroduced dogs again when they migrated once again across Asia and into the Arctic. Many Arctic dogs, particularly those of Greenland populations, are the descendants of this reintroduction. Though these Arctic dogs were very closely related to the pre-contact dogs of several thousand years ago, coming from Asia once again, they were genetically distinct from them, and it shows. The third migration was that of European dogs across the Atlantic, which we spoke of earlier, carrying diseases that decimated populations of the prior 2 migrations and later replacing them. The fourth and last migration was that of the husky dog during the early 1900s. Siberian Huskies, once again brought from northeastern Asia, were introduced into Alaska in response to the Alaskan Gold Rush, which attracted miners and workers from across the Bering Strait. I told you things get complicated, but the DNA found in these dogs records this long, complicated history, and it's fascinating. Now, the other very curious and somewhat perplexing finding these studies have found is how little of these initial prehistoric pre-contact dogs survives within dog populations today. Scientists were somewhat surprised to discover that almost no dogs alive today are descended from pre-contact dogs, or have any trace of their DNA. Shockingly, this was true even for many of those quote-unquote surviving authentic indigenous breeds. I quote, "The majority of modern American dog populations, including 138 village dogs from South America and multiple quote-unquote native breeds, possess no detectable traces of pre-contact dog ancestry." A further study sampling 590 individual dogs only found 2 modern American dogs, a Chihuahua and a mixed breed from Nicaragua, that carried the mitochondrial haplotypes indicative of pre-contact dog ancestry. This suggests pre-contact dog ancestry only accounts for less than 2% of all modern American dog populations. European dogs have almost completely, to a startling degree, replaced the original indigenous dogs, which have virtually vanished genetically. This is very strange, as it seems to paradoxically imply that the few surviving quote-unquote native breeds are in fact fakes with minimal to no genetic traces to their
Made in
ancient
Europe.
pre-contact roots. From ancient artwork
Yeah, that is
accounts, we
that is
know that
interesting.
these breeds, like the Chihuahua,
They
existed.
basically managed to. I mean, assuming these dogs are descended from Native American breeds, they basically managed to breed out all the genes while more or less keeping the same, I guess, phenotype. If I'm using that word
long
correctly.
before contact, but the surviving representatives don't appear to be pre-contact themselves. They're largely, if not entirely, European. They're fakes, at least they appear to be genetically. The few American breeds that
Crazy.
can claim descent from pre-contact dogs, at least for the moment, are Carolina dogs, Alaskan Huskies, Alaskan Malamutes, Greenland dogs, and of course those yummy little Chihuahuas.
Oh, okay.
They appear to be authentic, but only with traces.
Is that why they look like that? Because they still remember their days as freaking emergency rations.
Original heritage, largely watered down by the European replacers. The hairless breeds of Mexico and South America, and the yellow dogs of Peru, claimed to be the descendants of the Cheribaya dogs, have been so far shown to be of European heritage, with no detectable traces to pre-contact mummy specimens and skeletons. It's pretty dang weird. Are these Native American breeds even Native American after all? The historical evidence shows they are. However, the modern versions of these breeds don't appear to be, despite the resemblance. Pre-contact dogs are still around us, just incredibly, incredibly rare, and almost undetectable in the modern day. But perhaps the strangest discovery concerning these Native American dogs has to be that of CTVT, how a cancer has preserved an entire lineage. Canine transmissible venereal tumor, or CTVT, is a type of contagious cancer clone that can be spread between canines during mating. It's effectively the
Bro, that is crazy. I mean, as humans, had to deal with some diabolical STIs, but I'm glad transmissible cancer is not among them. I mean, also Tasmanian devils also have that, though. I don't think it's sexually transmitted. It's more like bite transmitted. But yeah, I mean, I'm not. What's the word? Like, hopefully, we humans would never have to deal with transmissible cancers. Like, oh my god.
Worst STD out there for dogs because living cancer cells can be transferred from one individual to another, infecting them with the clone, after which the process is repeated. The clone keeps on transferring and transferring from one to the other, like Cheap Trick. It's hard to describe for us humans
Okay,
because
JoJo
at least
fan.
at the moment it's
Actually,
not something.
I think Trade Explorer did commission like JoJo style artwork of Minoan like a fashion, I guess, for one of his videos on ancient Minoan culture. So I guess the evidence was there. I just didn't make the connection.
Our species has to worry about because it's not really a disease of the viral or bacterial variety as we know them. Essentially, what happened was somewhere in the distant past, a single quote-unquote founder dog, let's just say his name is Chad, possessed a tumor cell in its body through a mutation. This cancer cell replicated and replicated, growing into a tumor. Now, these tumors contain this dog's DNA and are technically a part of that dog in the same way your liver or heart is, but these tumors were rogues. When this dog mated, and we know Chad did, through some special
thanks
means,
for censoring.
tumor cells transferred to his partner and lived off the other animal, after which the process repeated by jumping to another host through more mating, the cancer continuing to create clones of itself on each of its hosts, and so on and so on and so on, all the while remaining genetically unrelated from said hosts, all these cancer clones containing Chad's original DNA. This cancer, known as CTVT, has essentially become a unicellular, asexually reproducing pathogen, despite technically being a type of dog. Though it functions more like a virus now, and it only appears as a disgusting growth, its DNA is dog DNA, and this gross cancer is, at least genetically, a living thing, just like your little pupper. Despite the original founder dog Chad, itself dying thousands of years ago, clones of its cancerous cells are still circulating and replicating alive and well to this day. The founder dog has effectively become immortal, Henrietta Lacks style. Imagine if your finger was cut off but kept on creating more and more cells that had your DNA long after you died. CTVT has spread amongst dogs all throughout the globe, from the Americas to Europe to Asia to Africa to Australia, and the contagious cancer continues to spread right this very moment. You might ask what all this has to do with pre-contact dogs. Well, as geneticists have found through analysis of the DNA of the cancer, the founder dog from which the cancer originates and possesses its DNA is prehistoric. CTVT is the oldest cancer known in nature, with the founder dog likely living around 11,000 years ago. Comparing the CTVT founder dog's DNA with other dog breeds, I guess this cancer is technically a breed of dog. Get on it, American Kennel Club. found that the founder dog was in fact, drumroll please, closest related to pre-contact dogs, if not being a pre-contact dog itself. That's right, baby. A weird, contagious cancer has more authentic indigenous ancestry than your Chihuahua. This cancer still has the DNA that once belonged to an individual Native American dog, or a dog extremely closely related to them, and still, after all these years, is still technically alive. Its cells and technically a part of its body are still, well, still living. A cancer circulating around the world, jumping from host to host, is one of the last remaining trace of its kind, the sole pure-blooded survivor of the Native American dogs. Imagine that. Ironic that diseases and viruses almost eliminated the Native American dogs, and yet it is a disease that is one helping to preserve them. I guess
one last get back, I guess.
it's the Native American dog's revenge.
Yeah.
Though they have almost completely been replaced, because one of them decided to turn into a unicellular pathogen, a part of their lineage lives on and inflicts itself on the conquerors themselves. Sounds like something straight out of science fiction. I'm reminded of dystopian futures
science
where people
fact.
upload their consciousness to computers in hopes of preserving themselves. The founder dog, I guess, has done something along those
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting idea. Basically, turning yourself into a disease instead of turning yourself into a computer virus infecting computer systems, you turn yourself into a biological virus infecting biological systems. Yeah, given that trying to upload your consciousness in the web would almost certainly not result in the continuation of your consciousness, would just make a copy of it. That's basically equivalent to it.
lines.
Is way more possible.
Fascinating and more bizarre than you ever would have dreamed. And so the CTVT cancer clone endures, forever infecting and replacing itself for the foreseeable future, if not eternity. The founder dog lives on, Chad, a remnant of this once diverse and great branch of man's best friend. So there you have it, the weird, tragic, and yet confusing story of the Native American dogs. We are still just beginning to scratch the surface of this mysterious and cryptic breed that has been largely lost to history, so hopefully we'll only learn more from here. Alright, thank you for enjoying this installment of Trey the Exploiter, and I hope you learned something new and enjoyed the show. Subscribe
definitely.
for more. Bye! Come run the hidden pine trails of the forest.
Wait, was
Come
that a
taste the
dog
sun-sweet
shaped
berries
like...
of the earth.
YouTube is getting way too cheeky.
All around you, and for once never wonder what they're worth. The Chihuahua is
Alright, so yeah. I mean, a lot of stuff described here was, they were things I learned or heard about over the course of my life in bits and pieces and isolated sort of a context. So, it's very interesting to get it all laid out comprehensively like that. Very neat and tidy like. Definitely did not know about the freaking Henrietta Chad dog or whatever. That's interesting right there. It's one of those freak nature accident sort of things. But yeah, great video. I mean, Trade Explorer, always great for this sort of stuff. Okay, so while we do have about 30 minutes left of what I would normally, I guess, record for, I have the aforementioned stock stream. The aforementioned stream coming up, and because of that, I gotta prepare other things, gotta move other things around, make sure I can be there for that, and I got other stuff after that as well. So be there for that. I think we're just gonna jump straight into it after the stream, so you'll be able to learn more about it then. But yeah, because of that, I will not be going over, since I'm sure if we check this video out, we would definitely probably go a little over the 30, a little longer than 30 minutes. So because of that, I'll be ending it here. But yeah, thank you very much for stopping by. As always, consider liking and commenting and subscribing, perhaps. But yeah, until next time, take care.
The Chihuahua is perhaps one of the most recognizable of the